Well, I told you, yeah, keep coming in, asking for another year of extension. Maintenance plan. Let's see. Finalized. Well, I did that.
So welcome everyone to the October 24th, 2024 RPC Transportation Advisory Committee meeting. We'll go through our usual start to the meeting with introductions. Dave Walker with the Rockingham Planning Commission.
Jim LeMaker, Town of Hempstead. Jim Moore, Classville. Classic, Chris O'Snee.
Alex.
Peter Tom Kingston.
Michaela Drum, Rockingham Planning Commission.
Sorry.
Chris Grosky.
Bob Dion, Greenland. Scott Vogel with Rockingham Planning Commission. Mark Kennedy, Land Use Administrator from Town of Brown.
Okay, thank you. And then going to folks online. Joe.
Yeah, Joe Lynch, Town of Hampton.
All right. Eric.
Eric Eby, City of Portsmouth.
And what's your cat's, what's your cat's name?
And the cat.
Oh, that's Coconut.
Okay,
Coconut.
all right, appropriate,
I
yep.
like that.
It's important we know everybody that's at the meeting.
Okay.
Susan.
Susan Connors, Town of Stratham,
All right.
missing Mark very much.
Yeah.
Without him, stressed.
Sorry to hear that it's stressful. Jack.
Jack Wade, New Hampshire Environmental Services.
All right, Jack. Jessica.
Hey there, Jessica Wilcox, also with Environmental Services. Good to see you all.
All right, welcome. And then Danya, is that you hiding behind Roger's name?
This is Danya from Rye. Yes, I had to steal my husband's computer since my computer was not working. Good morning all, or good afternoon all.
All right, well, all right, thank you, everyone. All right, the next item on the agenda is the minutes of the September meeting.
I'll move that if we answer that last highlighted question, any other updates? If there's no other updates, I'll move that we accept the minutes. See, you got that in there. I guess we're supposed to address it.
Do we turn recording on? Do we have?
Yeah, I did that.
Yeah, you did.
I did this time.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I remembered instead of, halfway through the presentation like last month. I don't remember that there were other updates.
No.
I think we have any.
Yeah, so we can scratch that out later.
And then. Move to accept the minutes as modified.
Okay,
Second.
all right, thanks, Jim. Second. Okay, all in favor of the approving the minutes with the one minor adjustment there?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Just a question, was there a second to that motion? Yeah.
Jim seconded, yep. All right, thank you everyone on that one. All right, the next item on the agenda is 2023 to 2026 TIP amendment number 7. I am going to bring a presentation up on the screen and go through this. What I'm hoping will be very quickly, but we'll see. Let's see. I never found these. There we are. This mouse is being tricky today. There we go.
The audio is missing.
Yeah, I
Is that
think
just one?
Susan can hear us now. I think we were just muted
Oh,
initially,
okay.
so. Okay, so, all right. I think after all these years of using Zoom, I'd be a little more efficient about transitioning to a presentation, but let me see.
Post-COVID, we don't have to declare who's in the room with us.
Right, right. There are some efficiencies that we have gained over time. So, okay, so we are here with Amendment 7 to the Transportation Improvement Program, as well as this is also amending the State Transportation Improvement Program. It's unusual for us to get to an Amendment 7. I think this is we usually do them orderly at the most. But I think we've done 4 since the start of this year. So it's a little more than usual. We usually are at this point starting in the process of building the next tip, the 25 to 28 in this case. But DOT has determined they need to postpone that a little bit. And in the interim, we're going to do this Amendment 7. So there's a number of projects that we're going to be working to update here. So there are 11 projects total that are being changed. 9 of them are projects that are in the region, and 2 of them are statewide programmatic programs that are changing. We won't be starting a public comment period till the end of next week, and that will go through the 12th of November. Go right up to the day before our commission meeting on the 13th, where our commissioners will ideally approve the amendment and the changes included. As we have not started a public comment period, we have received no public comments yet. Which, not surprising. So I'm just going to kind of step through the changes that are occurring to the projects. Do you have something, Mike?
What is typical for the volume of the public response, public comments?
It is typically very low. We occasionally will get some questions. Rarely do we get anything that sort of would qualify as comment. People are just like, oh, why is this changing? Kind of questions like that. Occasionally we will get a comment on a project, but most frequently the comments that we receive are actually often new projects being added into the amendment. Not necessarily a brand new project, but a project that DOT didn't realize needed to be amended until after we had started the process. And so it gets added in kind of during it. That's generally what happens. Occasionally we'll have a project drop out of the amendment, which, that also qualifies as sort of a public comment piece of this. So,
All right, thank you.
Yep. So we've got one new project coming into the tip at this point, and this is a bridge project on Bridge Street in Salem. And it's just under a $5 million project. And so that's being added into the tip document. We have 2 projects that are being removed from the tip. And these projects aren't going away. They're just essentially being delayed beyond the tip years at this point. So first is the Pond Street Bridge over the railroad in Newton. And so that's dropping in cost to 0 in the tip, but the overall project cost is actually going up. It's going to be a $2.3 million project. And construction was delayed to, I want to say 2029, 2030, somewhere in that time frame. The Northampton Rye, this 42312B, this is a subcontract to deal with the reconstruction of the revetment walls, the seawalls along the ocean there in Northampton and Rye. And again, this is similar to the Newton project. The timing of this project is just shifting, and so the money for it is sort of being delayed beyond the step. And the other 2 pieces of that Northampton Rye project are also included in this amendment. You basically see there's a bunch of money being shifted around between the 3 projects. So that's kind of why we're seeing a decrease in this project overall. It was a $20 million project. Now it's about a $14.5 million project. But things are still moving forward on that. So then we have the remaining projects, the remaining 8 projects, I believe, are all projects where either the funding is being adjusted somewhat, or the timing of the project is being adjusted somewhat, or a combination of both. So Kindia Raymond 43839, that project is being shifted in terms of some of the construction is moving out beyond into 2027, basically, I think. And so the cost change in the tip is going down, but overall the project is increasing in cost. So that's a $24 million project there.
Question, Bill.
Yep.
Does that Candia Raymond project represent only the portion of the project that's within our district?
No.
Is it also?
That's the whole, yeah, that's the whole project. So generally, when we have projects that straddle boundaries, between planning commissions, we include the whole project in. So, yep. Epping 29608, similarly, construction is being delayed out beyond 2026. And so that's why this project is decreasing by $5 million during the course of the TIP. Overall, there's almost a $12 million increase in the project. So this is a growing project. And basically what is happening is there's more time needed for the design work that's occurring on that corridor to determine what the most appropriate improvements are. Northampton Rye 42312 and 42312A. Again, this is those revetment seawalls in those two communities. And you can see the DOT got a Protect grant, almost $24 million from the federal government to add to this project. And so that's being included and added in the main project there. And then the A project, we're seeing just a shift in the timing of it. So overall, it's decreasing in the TIP by almost 12 million. Again, that construction money is moving out to, I believe, 2027, 2028 timeframe. So overall, that project cost is increasing by almost $7.5 million. But in the TIP, it's actually decreasing quite a lot. So.
I got a question. Sure. Do these jobs get pushed out because of waiting for federal funding? Do you know that, or is it different reasons?
It's not. It can be due to financial constraints.
Yeah.
Often it's sort of the natural progress of the project. It's just going slower than they anticipated, or maybe they don't get a permit approved, or they find some major issue that requires some additional design work and it just delays things. In some cases you have things, and I'm not sure in the case of those revetment seawalls, right, but you can only do construction during certain times of the year in certain places because of, endangered species that maybe nest or migrate through a particular area, or, you can cause too much damage by working at a particular time of year. So sometimes if a project gets delayed even a month or two, it can basically reset construction to a year later kind of thing. So you have some of that. A lot of it though is just that there's a lot of work that needs to get done, and it doesn't always get done as quickly as it needs to meet a certain expected time frame from when the TIP was developed a year or two ago. Right. So there's a lot of issues that, and we try to get that information from DOT when a project is delayed like these. We say, okay, so what's happening here? Why is this project being slowed down? And often it's there's just more work to do than we anticipated kind of stuff. So
some of these changes also fund projects that are currently in the TIP.
So, yes, essentially, yeah. So DOT sort of really endeavors to spend all the federal funds that we have available. So if a project gets delayed and that frees up, say, $5 or $10 million worth of federal funding, they'll put that into another project that is moving forward on time. You know what I mean? So they don't ever. It's rare for a project to get dropped entirely, but when things shift around, DOT uses other projects to fill the gaps in the funding, basically. So, and in fact, DOT pretty much programs 100% of federal funds. And then at the end of every federal fiscal year, there's a period called redistribution, where those states that didn't spend all their federal funds, basically the feds basically give the authority to spend those funds to states that have spent all the money. And so we often get some additional funding at the end of the fiscal year that DOT basically has projects waiting in the wings, ready to get that money if it comes in. And so that can range from 5 to 10 million up to 30 or 40 million dollars at the end of the fiscal year, depending on how other states have done in spending their money. Part of that, the reason why we were able to spend all of ours is that we are 50th out of 50 states in terms of how much money comes to this state for federal transportation dollars. So, we're really tightly constrained on our budgets. And there are smaller states that get more money than us. So
we need to get in the top 10.
Yeah, that would be great. I don't envision that happening, but they could share the wealth a little bit more.
So we're dead last in funding?
Yes.
Wow.
Although it's possible maybe Puerto Rico and Washington DC get less than we do, but I'm not entirely positive on that. But out of the 50 states, we are 50th.
That needs to be addressed.
It's a known issue, but it doesn't, it's a formula-based distribution that was established back two major bills ago, and it hasn't been, we can't seem to get any traction on getting that, because there'll be other states that lose out, right? So nobody wants to lose out on potential funding, so it's an uphill battle.
Money and they're not paying attention, maybe they won't notice.
Right.
Density, is it a formula calculated on density per square mile?
I don't know, it's a complicated thing, and some of it is based on population, some of it is based on federal aid eligible miles of roadway. Some of it is based on politics, I think, it's, who happened to be in charge at the time that the bill was written,
That's probably the biggest piece.
Yeah, it may be, so,
Based on seatbelt and helmet laws.
that can play into things too, yeah.
Yeah. Very
So,
tricky to
yeah.
project funds.
Yep, so, okay, so these 4 projects, and then, the final 4 projects, Portsmouth 20258. This is a Beverly Hill Road, sidewalk, bike lane construction in Portsmouth. Basically, construction is actually advancing a little bit on that. They consolidate all the construction funding into 2026, pulling some of it forward from 2027. We see an overall decrease in the cost of the project because basically it recalculates inflation when you move that money around. So then the next 2 are the statewide programmatics that I had mentioned before. The first is the FLAP program. This is the federal land access. And so this is funding that goes to improve access to any federal lands in the state, right? And so just basically money is being shifted around in that a little bit, and it's decreasing the amount of money in the existing TIP and pushing it out a little bit further, but the overall funding is staying the same for that program. The 5307, this is the statewide urbanized area bus and transit funding. This is basically including the actual apportionments to the state for 2025 and 2026. The previous numbers in there were the estimated apportionments for those 2 fiscal years, if my memory is right. So we're seeing an overall increase. And then we see an overall growth further out too in that project because the project is listed in the 10-year plan for every year out to 2034. And so we see that. So that money that's listed, that 104 million is out basically 10 years. And then finally is the Seabrook Route 1 project there north of the 107 intersection between New Zealand Road and Hampton Falls. Basically, it's just some additional funds added to that project to support the design work and the anticipated costs of that. So those are all the projects that are changes. Are there any further questions on those? No?
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
First one, why is the Bridge Street Bridge being added into the TIP?
That probably came through the bridge program and was either overlooked previously in terms of needing to be in the TIP, or they've been able to advance it for some reason or needed to advance it, maybe due to the condition of the bridge, and so it needs to get dealt with sooner, and that's why the money is starting into the TIP.
Okay, second question. Does RPC have a grants advisor who can advise communities what grants might be applied for pertinent to projects that they're working on?
We don't have anybody who's sort of designated as that, but we do, as staff, keep our eyes open for grants that are available and that communities can apply for, right? And we try to, when we see something that makes sense for a particular community, we do try to alert them to that as best we can.
Okay. You're better off hiring a grant writer within your community. We've recently done that. That's their sole purpose, is to look for grants for your community. You can do that on a part-time basis.
So, okay. So we have talked about air quality conformity just a little bit. We are an attainment area, but we do have a requirement that we restate that we are in an attainment area, and we are addressing any air quality conformity issues through the existing analysis that we did back in 2015. Fiscal constraint, DOT, there was fiscal constraint tables attached to what went out to everybody. DOT maintains that the STIP at the statewide level remains fiscally constrained and that we're not proposing to spend more money than we have available. And so we take their word for it on that. But overall net funding is changing in our TIP. It's going up by about $10 million, $10.5 million. So,
So that's a question for you, Dave.
yeah,
I mean, funding, obviously, part of our funding is also coming through gas tax. With the influx of electric vehicles and the high mileage efficiency of just traditional vehicles, are we seeing a downside on the funding, but an upside on the construction? And how are we planning for that?
yeah, that's an ongoing policy question that states and the feds are avoiding. I think is probably the best.
I don't know, we've already introduced, they've already instituted the electric vehicle tax. Just to make up for that, and so that there's considerable tax on electric.
Yeah,
Well, it's a $50 tax and putting out registration on electric vehicles.
right.
But the other thing we still have is, I mean, vehicles now, you see so many vehicles getting 30 to 35, 40 miles per gallon.
Yep.
We don't have as many as 12 mile per gallon guzzlers that we used to have.
So, yeah, I mean, that is absolutely impacting the bottom line.
Yeah.
And the federal government has made up for that by using general funds to supplement gas tax money that goes into the transportation program. At the state level, there are very few state funds that actually go into the transportation program. The TIP, you look at the TIP, any state funds are really toll credits. It's not actual money, it's pretend money. It allows us to meet the 80-20 match requirement, but it's not actual cash. And so we do get local funds in there. We get, Coast has to match some of their programs 50%. So we get local funds that way, a little bit of state money, maybe that way. And there's occasionally projects where there's a little bit of state funding here and there, but largely that's all done via toll credits. And the state gas tax funding goes pretty much to paving. So
there just hasn't been political appetite to address revenue generation for the transportation system, either at the state or federal level, particularly at the federal level. There have been, I think did you mention, there have been a couple of pilot projects in different states looking at vehicle miles traveled based systems. I think there was one of those in Oregon. If anything, what gets put forward is let's take a hiatus on the gas tax.
Right.
So we need to kind of come up, get people together and figure out what's the path going forward. But as yet, there hasn't been a will to do that.
There was a gas tax increase in New Hampshire a number of years ago now, and that was purely to fund I-93 expansion, that Salem to Manchester project. And now that money initially went in and was used to supplement the paving program for a number of years, but now all that money is going to the debt service on the Salem to Manchester, and it will be going until it sunsets in 2034, 2035, somewhere like that time frame. And then we'll see if it continues after that. But at this point, who knows?
Federal gas tax hasn't been increased since 1993, I think. Since the last time that was touched.
As I said earlier, we haven't had any comments received on any project changes. I mentioned this in the memorandum, and I think I'm going to let Scott talk about it in more detail, but there are two coast-related projects that we're hoping to still get into this amendment as part of the public comment process. And we are sort of actively working on that, but are still awaiting, in some cases, some responses from Federal Highway Administration, and some trying to get that progress. So I don't know, maybe Scott, you can just give a quick overview.
In the case of the 5339 grant, Coast had applied late last year that's a particular pool of Federal Transit Administration funding for bus replacement. This is to replace 4 buses that are nearing the end of their useful life. The grant was approved, but then with the 10-year plan, there was another pool of funding, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, or CMAQ funding, that was proposed to supplement or to substitute in for some of that. Internally at DOT, they still haven't figured out exactly how that substitution is gonna work, so. Getting this added is being held up, and so we're working with Coast to try to get DOT to. Expedite getting that project added, because there's a very long delay with the bus companies to actually get the buses built. So we're hoping that DOT will agree to add that project funded entirely with 5339, and then they can do a minor adjustment later on to substitute in the CMAQ dollars, but that would allow Coast to get in the queue with the bus manufacturer so that they can get the buses by mid 2026 instead of sometime in 2027, if this has to wait for the full tip next spring. And then on Commute Smart Seacoast, this is 5 years of funding to bring back a full-time staff member for outreach for the Transportation Management Association, or the TMA. This was approved as a CMAQ project, supported by FTA, but the Federal Highways Office in DC has asked questions about it and hasn't been particularly responsive. So the hope is that both of these projects can be added as part of the public comment period, and we're working on that with DOT. I don't know if you want to add anything, Red.
On the 5339 grant, when the governor suggested using CMAQ funds, we were, as Coast, we were fine with that. The 5339 program was oversubscribed. Needed to find a solution to get everybody the vehicles that they needed to replace. What I know I didn't understand was that CMAQ is not a programmatic. I had, for some reason, been thinking it was a programmatic, and I was like, well, that's fine. We have pre-award authority as long as the funds are listed in the STIP in whatever program it gets funded. But because it's not a programmatic, we don't have pre-award authority. We can't get in the queue with the bus manufacturer. On the Commute Smart Seacoast project, we were asked to pull this project out of STIP amendment number 4 by the feds. So we're now on STIP amendment number 7. We're still trying to work through eligibility of this project. We may not have used precise wording in our original grant application that was approved by DOT. We have subsequently provided much more precise language that this is a marketing and what's the
Outreach.
Marketing and outreach project. There is a meeting tomorrow between the FHWA, between Lead Line here in New Hampshire with FHWA and the DC office. Hopefully, we'll see some resolution after that meeting. I've made myself available to be part of that meeting, if that would be helpful. So has Bill Watson with New Hampshire DOT. I think we've provided everything that we need to provide to get this over the hump.
All right, excellent, thank you, thanks. So if there aren't any more questions on the revisions, I do need a recommendation from the TAC to approve Amendment 7. And I won't say as written here,
No.
because we're hoping that it won't be approved as written, and there'll be a couple of additions to that, so.
I make that motion.
I'll second that, that's Peter.
Motion Rand, second Peter, all in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
All right,
And that's is that a recommendation to the MPO?
it's a recommendation to the policy committee who will meet on the 13th
Right, okay.
to talk about it, okay. So, okay, all right, thank you for that. And we'll move right along to the 10-year plan project selection. I had put aside an hour for this. I'm hopeful that it won't take quite that long. But, you know, we never quite know these things. But I'm gonna bring up another presentation. Everybody is shocked about that. So, okay, so we're here to sort of narrow down our projects that we're proposing for the state tenure plan. We are quite a way through the process that we started basically at the beginning of the year. So we have, solicited projects from our communities. We classified all those projects and scored them. And at our June meeting, we came up with a list of projects to send to the engineers for cost estimates. They have completed that work, at least in draft form, and you've been sent those estimates. We've had some discussions with DOT about a couple of the projects over this time frame as well. And now we need to set our draft priorities that we're going to send to NHDOT for scope and cost review next month. They will work on that scope and cost review over the winter and return information back to us February-ish timeframe. And then we'll meet at the TAC in March and then the policy committee in April, or maybe it's February and March, because it's by the end of March we have to do this. So we'll meet with the TAC in February and the policy committee in March to finalize our priorities for the next iteration of the tenure plan. And that's the 2026 to 35 plan. At least 26 to 34. Anyways,
That sounds
my math thing is failing today. So the next tenure plan will end in 2036. So all proposed projects construction will be programmed likely in 2035 or 2036. And so that's what we're proposing today, is to figure out what are our priorities for that DOT can review. We are due to submit the candidate projects on November 8th. Our commission doesn't meet though until the 13th of November. So we've got the okay from DOT to submit after that. So I'll be submitting these as soon as the commission approves them next month. And then we have to submit our final priorities to DOT after that scope and cost review by the end of March next year. And they'll put those projects, whatever we set as our priority, or priorities, they'll put that right into the tenure plan as we presented it to them. So the guidance, and then I've covered a little bit of this, and I just like to kind of reiterate it a lot. They'll add construction to one of the last 2 years or both of the last 2 years of the tenure plan. Engineering right away might be programmed ahead of that, maybe a number of years ahead of it. It may be a year or two ahead of it. That's something that they figure out as they go along. Our target funding that we have available for the region is just a little bit over 8 million, 8.055 million. We must include 3.7% per year inflation, as well as 10% indirect costs. Basically, that's DOT's administrative costs to dealing for managing projects. As you can imagine, that does eat up quite a bit of money. And you'll see that in some of the information that I'll show you about just how much that eats up. We use a common set of project selection criteria that we share with all 9 planning commissions to make those decisions. We have to go through the engineering cost review, and that's what we're setting up a short list for today. And then as part of that, we can submit projects up to the budget amount of that just over 8 million plus 2. There's a little bit of wiggle room there, but we need to stick fairly close to those standards. And then, as I said before, that, once we've selected a final set of priorities, up to that budget amount next March, DOT will put that in the tenure plan as is. The caveat being, the tenure plan is a political process, and so things can change. It's rare, at least in our region, to have our projects. I can't even remember if we've ever had a project actually pulled from the tenure plan as part of the GASSET process. But I don't want to jinx myself by saying it can't ever happen.
The +2 for review, regardless of cost.
Regardless of cost.
Right, so you could just like take Portsmouth traffic circle in there because it's
you
10
could,
times the
right. You could certainly do things like that, and I may have done that previously.
Yes.
Gotta play the game, right?
Yeah.
So changes in June, we had selected 13 projects to put forward for cost estimates. Due to funding constraints and the amount of money that we had available to do that with our engineering, our engineering team, we had to cut that back a little bit. And sort of through some discussions, we pulled out a few projects basically that, are probably either a lower priority to have estimates done, or they don't need them at all because there's ongoing work. So Raymond, Blueberry Hill, that project remains in the queue for road safety audit through the Highway Safety Improvement Program. So we're just going to let that be for now and let it be a part of that process. Portsmouth Circle, we've got it included in the 10-year plan as a study. I definitely would like, as part of our priority setting when, next March, to reinforce with DOT. We'd love to see that study moved up to, it's, I think, scheduled for 2029. Is that what you remember, Scott? We would like to see that in, 2026, 2027 timeframe. So we'll be asking and requesting that as part of our 10-year plan comments. But it's in there now, and until we know kind of what is likely a likely outcome, it seems wasteful to keep doing project estimates, because we have an estimate on an alternative, but it just seems like it's not worth doing anything on that until we have some more information and a study is done. Rye Newcastle. These are the 1B resiliency projects that we talked about, some low spots on Route 1B in Newcastle and Rye that were initially included in the Newcastle Causeway feasibility study that was completed last year. We thought it was included in the project that's moving forward from that to address the causeway. They are not, but they are, however, being incorporated into, there's 2 bike pedestrian projects occurring on 1B, one in Rye and one in Newcastle, I believe. And the design and construction for those spots will be incorporated into those bike ped projects. So those low spots are being addressed. So we don't need to do anything with those right now. And then the Maplewood Avenue culvert, this is another one that they actually had started some repair work on that bridge culvert. And when they got into the repair work, they discovered it was more extensive than they had anticipated, and it's actually turned into more of a bridge rehabilitation. And so once they're done with that, the expected lifespan of that bridge will be another 40 to 50 years. So we don't really need a project to replace it at this point, which is what we had in there before. The only caveat to that would be the work that they're doing now won't address any issues related to sea level rise. So that would be the only need to really replace that in the future, would be to deal with that sea level rise issues. But that's not an imminent thing. So I think we can hold off on doing anything with that project. And then for 2 of the remaining 9, we changed the scopes a little bit. In one case, quite a lot. The coastal evacuation ITS, where it was basically looking at what intelligent transportation systems improvements were needed to facilitate evacuation from the coast in the event of emergency, that kind of thing. Given that we don't really understand what that scope might be, we asked HTA to scope it as a study instead of a full-blown implementation project, just to kind of figure out what's really needed for this. And then finally, when we were talking about the 1A project in Seabrook, basically between the 1A bridge over the Hampton Harbor and Route 286 and the Massachusetts line, it's scoped as initially as a bike pedestrian project. But what it is out there, that's a 4-lane road with no turning lanes, sandwiched between 2 2-lane roads. So it's this big, wide open, straight, flat section of road where people just fly. And there's a lot of speeding that goes along there. And the 2 lanes in each direction isn't really necessary. The analysis that they did for the bridge said that 1 lane each direction is plenty, and more than enough capacity, especially with the bridge when it's replaced, no longer being an opening bridge, so it won't ever stop traffic. So the holdup is really any congestion is really generated in Hampton Beach itself, and it's not the bridge or the approach roadways. So the thought was we would turn that project into a traffic calming project as well, and basically narrow it down to 1 lane each direction with a center turn lane, use some of that existing pavement width for bike shoulders, full-size bike shoulders, and then add some sidewalks in. caveat is that that is a very long stretch of road. It's over 2 miles, I think. So it gets to be quite expensive very quickly. But that being said, we decided to take this approach to it. So I'm going to just kind of go through. Oh, I'm seeing Joe has a question.
I'm just curious about the dynamic between those two projects, the coastal evaluation ITS and the traffic calming project, since the coastal evacuation very well could include Seabrook plant, and they almost, one needs to consider the other.
Yeah. There is some overlap there for sure. So, and that's something we would, assuming one or both move forward, we would definitely want to, include that information that there is some overlap here. So, okay, let's see, let's move Joe up to the corner. So I'm just going to kind of go through the sites that we got the estimates on, and I have each of these kind of set up the same way. So you can see, basically just trying to provide a little bit of information about the site itself and the proposed project, as well as the cost estimate summary. You'll notice that the cost estimates here are actually a little higher than the ones that were sent out to you from HTA, because we neglected to include DOT's indirect costs in that. So everything is inflated by another 10%, basically from what was sent out to you. This one is the Main Street North Avenue intersection of Plastow Main Street is Route 121A. Goes through the sort of the town center and bypasses 125. A lot of times, a lot of traffic uses it to bypass Route 125. And so there's a lot of traffic that actually uses North Avenue, actually has more volume on it, I think, than Main Street itself. This intersection is relatively congested during peak hours. What we proposed at that site is a relatively compact roundabout that would actually probably push this intersection just to the south a little bit, kind of into this wooded area, and be a three-legged roundabout, basically, is what would be there. Total costs on that project, when we inflate it out and add the indirects, and these are rounded numbers, $4.1 million. The Route 108 bike and pedestrian improvements in Stratham. This is a project that was also looked at last round, and was one of our top. So we basically got an update on the project estimate for it that incorporated DOT's review response as well, and their suggestions for that project. It's a long stretch of 108, so we're talking 3,000 feet of sidewalk along the southbound side and 5,600 feet of side path along the northbound side, which you can probably phase bits of this project to break it into smaller pieces. And just should be adding some mid-block crossings along there. When we revisited the unit cost numbers and took into account DOT's comments from 2 years ago, this project, base cost was about $3,800 and $6,100 overall, once you add in inflation and indirects. The cost that we had 2 years ago was I think once we inflated it was like $4 million. So pretty substantial increase on this project. And a lot of that was basically the increased unit costs as well as incorporating DOT's comments. Five Corners in Epping. This is out sort of in West Epping along Route 27. There's this very kind of interesting intersection of 27 with Blake Road coming in from the top of the picture, and from the bottom of the picture we have School Street and Friend Street and Depot Road all sort of coming together in this one giant paved area. There's also a little village market right here that creates some additional sort of chaos in that. Because of its site location, you kind of have an uphill slope on this side to the, I guess that's to the east of this site, and uphill to the west, if I remember right, and it's on a curve. It's a little bit more of a complicated project than initially seen. We did scope a roundabout here, a 5-legged roundabout, along with a realignment of Friend Street, which is probably a very conservative approach in terms of cost for this. It will operate very well under, if a roundabout is put in there, level of service A, which is basically the highest, operating you can do in terms of reduced amount of delay and congestion. It's not a super congested site. There isn't a huge swath of crashes that are occurring at this site either, so it's not a horrible crash history. But it popped up to the top of our scoring, and so we included it. But overall, this is almost an $8.7 million project overall, so it's kind of expensive. And that's, I think, due to the complicated nature of the intersection as it exists now. This is in Greenland. This is the intersection of Route 33, Winnicott Road and Bayside Road. We are making the assumption here in this case that we're basically expanding the signalized intersection that is there now by adding a second through lane in each direction. That does, however, require that this bridge here to the east of the intersection gets widened as well. So that basically is replacing that bridge. There's actually a study in the 10-year plan right now that's looking at that bridge, or will be looking at that bridge when it starts. I believe that's scheduled for next year, 2025. This is also a very expensive project, and a big chunk of that is because of the adding in the bridge costs to that. And so, yeah, and this information is based, the town of Greenland paid a consultant to do an analysis of the intersection and come up with a couple of options for making improvements there. And that was done in 2020, I believe. Yeah. And so HTA took the numbers that consultant came up with and applied current unit costs to that. And then the current inflation rate from DOT, added in the 10% indirects, and then we get a $15.5 million project. So, of which, 6 million of that is inflation and that 10% add-on. So, that can take a big chunk and inflate these projects very quickly. So, it's a good sized project, and there is a fair amount of congestion that happens at that location at peak hours. It seems to move through pretty quickly, but it does create a very long queue that extends east of this intersection almost all the way to the Depot Road, 151 Route 33 intersection, and it can go beyond it.
It's a mile long in each direction.
Yeah. So it can create a long queue. It does seem to move pretty quickly, but it does create this very long queue, which is unusual to get queues that long. And largely that's because the current intersection was designed not for capacity purposes, but for safety purposes. There had been a couple of fatal crashes there, and DOT came in and said, we can put a signal here at this intersection because it was unsignalized. It's going to create some congestion, but it will resolve the fatal crash issue that you've had at that intersection. And so that was the choice made at the time. And now the congestion is sort of growing there. So it is a bit of a concern. So this is the 1A project in Seabrook, traffic calming. So as you can see, it's a pretty wide open road, 2 lanes, straight and flat in each direction, no turning, very wide shoulders in some cases. So we've reduced this to a 3-lane cross section, basically with a center 12-foot turning lane through a large chunk of it, and 1 through lane in each direction. Traffic volumes kind of support that would work. And we'd be converting some of the existing pavement into bike shoulders, bike lanes, and then sidewalks could be built as well. We've incorporated all of those things into the project cost, and that's part of the reason why it's very expensive. I believe it's like 2.4 miles, so that's part of the reason it is very expensive. This would also incorporate some mid-block pedestrian crossings because there aren't any right now. And another big concern and another big thing that's in all these projects is stormwater. Dealing with stormwater has is something that DOT is required to do in all these projects, and it is costly. Especially in locations where there isn't any stormwater controls now, because it used to be that the DOT had to sort of add stormwater controls for any additional pavement that they put out there, but now it's, you have to add stormwater controls for all the pavement that's out there. So when you have something like this, which is very long and wide, and it doesn't have any stormwater control, that can get costly to add that sort of information in there, so. The advantage of this project, I think, is that you could potentially phase this into 3 pieces. You could do the traffic calming piece of it, which would largely be basically milling down the existing pavement and repaving it, restriping it. And that would, you know, convert the lanes to, you know, the 3-lane process, as well as add in the bike shoulders. And then you could do maybe break the pedestrian improvements, the sidewalk improvements into 2 pieces. And that might cut your costs. So basically you might break this into like kind of 3 parts, you know, and it might be a 3 $5 million projects or 3 $6 million projects, which may be more palatable as a regional priority to do one of those or that sort of thing. And that's something that we can have Hoyle Tanner look at as well in more detail. They've done a little bit of that, but we could have that costed out if that makes sense too.
Is there any sort of barrier or separation between the travel lane and the bike lane?
I don't believe that we incorporate anything into the design at this point. But there's a lot of pavement out there right now. And so there's a lot of space to work with. I think that you could, I mean, it probably would be more of not a physical barrier, but maybe a visual barrier, like a wider painted line kind of thing, you know, that kind of thing.
Posts.
Maybe, yeah.
Like $140.
Yep, you could do something like that. So there's some options there. And again, you know, any of these projects that we put forward, if they actually go and get in the 10-year plan, they go through a full design process where, you know, engineers will look at the alternatives and look at design options and come up with what makes the best sense and what is acceptable to communities. So our job here is to come up with a reasonable estimate of a cost of a project and a reasonable scope. But yeah, there's a lot of wiggle room. There's a lot of opportunities to do different things here. So yeah, overall, this is a $17 million project once we incorporate inflation into it. So it's a pretty hefty price tag. But again, I think it could be broken up into smaller pieces that might be more palatable. Stratham Circle redesign. So intersection of Route 108 and 33 in Stratham. This is also one that we had an estimate done 2 years ago for. This did not go forward though to get reviewed by DOT. And basically this would replace the existing circle by dead ending one leg of it and then building a roundabout on that sort of northwest corner that would connect Route 33 and 108. You know, there are some safety issues that occur here that, you know, these traffic circles, people fly through them at high speed. You have a lot of oblique angle crashes as vehicles don't yield as they're supposed to and that sort of thing. And so there's quite a bit of traffic through there, but this would work pretty well. But it's an expensive project. Once we inflate it, it's almost a $19 million project. So it's a pretty hefty price tag. And part of that is because on this northern side here, this is a pond, there's a dam and a culvert right in here that would have to be addressed as part of this. So it's pretty extensive work outside of the roadway that would need to occur. So, and this is based on a study that the town of Stratham did in 2010, and it's been kind of floating around and since then. So, and it's part of their vision for their future downtown in that area too. So, Route 125 and South Road in Brentwood. Basically, a road safety audit was done last year at this site. And it's the site of 2 fatal crashes in the last few years. And so the long-term recommendation for that was to build a roundabout at that location. And that's what is being proposed here as part of this. We basically took the work that was done during the road safety audit and updated the unit costs and added in the current inflation and that kind of thing into it. So it's not a super expensive project. That's $4.2 million. this project is also, there's also some ongoing work. I think that they already did some very interim improvements in that site. Yeah, and there's more work that will be happening, I believe, next year to add in some turning lanes for those businesses that are adjacent to this intersection.
Those are already done.
Oh, those are already done.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
Hourly Donuts, and the courthouse.
Okay, great. So that's already been completed then. Those were the short term, there were some short term improvements and some medium term improvements, and that was what's been implemented there. This is the long term proposal for that site. We could go through the 10-year plan process on this. The other thing is this would be an excellent project for the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. It's also continues to be eligible for the HSIP, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, given the fatalities at the location. So those might be alternatives to get that project funded and implemented more quickly than through the 10-year plan process, which would be, minimum 10 years from now.
This is the last crossover street, last road that crosses over at 125.
Right.
It's bad.
Yeah, it is.
It needs to be addressed, and I'm highly supportive of still staying on the 10-year plan.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty relatively reasonably cost project, $2.5 million, and then we add the inflation on, so 4.2. Of course, if we could get it done sooner, it would be theoretically less costly in that we don't have to deal with so much inflation. So 101 I-95 eastbound ramp. This is 101 eastbound connection to I-95. It's a single lane ramp here that then widens out to 2 lanes as it approaches the bridge back over 101. This project would make this a 2-lane ramp as well as build an auxiliary lane out of the picture another 1,000 feet basically. It's, there's no right-of-way issues there. It's basically just adding some pavement along and dealing with some of the related issues to that in here. So it's about a $5.5 million project, and then we add the inflation on it, it's almost $9 million. Interestingly, basically the ramp itself is part of the turnpike system, but the approach is not. So there's a possibility it could be partially funded through the turnpike program. Not sure. District 6, this is one of their top priorities here in their DOT maintenance. This is the area that they hear one of the areas they hear the most about as being a problem. And there are queues that line up back, if you've used this area off the screen to the top of the picture, it kind of goes up over a hill and then down, and you get queues going up over that hill. So queues going back 500, 600, 800 feet, and creating problems with mainline traffic that's staying on 101. So
what causes the queue?
It's basically the fact that everybody has to slow down so much on this ramp, and it goes in basically that's really what's causing it, is that I think, and then just some additional capacity would shorten those queues substantially, as well as getting most vehicles out of the flow of the mainline traffic by building that auxiliary lane.
So the turnpike part is causing the queue.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe they should fund that.
Do the toll booths have any impact? I think it all impacts itself.
I think they probably can. We haven't, we didn't do sort of a full traffic analysis on this. I've never been like fully stopped going through that. I don't go through it all that often, but often there's a queue and it's a slowdown, but it moves along. And with Easy Pass, most of the traffic is using the Easy Pass, so they just kind of blow through the side toll there, but it does slow down. And I mean, you can see in the picture, and this is just from Google Maps. You can see the kind of queue project, and because it's such a tight curve, people have to slow way down, and especially if truck traffic is very slow around that. And occasionally there's rollovers that happen on that corner from trucks coming in and not slowing down enough. I've seen a couple of those over the years. So, some redesign work might help alleviate some of that delay and that slowing down. So.
What about taking down the toll booths and replacing it with just drive-throughs?
I think it's an option. I know DOT is doing some work out there now on that sort of stuff, but I think the side toll booths seem to be staying.
Yeah,
but
crashes on the main line this year.
Yep. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that's always an option, building a system like what Maine put in, with the wide open, open road tolling. And, we sort of got a partial system like that, but on the side tolls, of course, you have to slow down to the 25 miles an hour to go through the easy pass.
And sort of in my experience, just it usually frees up at about 10 or 11 o'clock. If you think of that as a circle, then you can sort of see that in the spacing.
Yeah,
between
you
the
kind of,
cars.
spacing shows.
That once you're,
Once you're
as
around
the lanes open up, then there isn't much trouble getting through the
Right.
booth.
It's that hard clean.
Yeah, but, again, I don't usually go through it at, noon on a Saturday in July, when you're most likely to be the busiest time, but
You know better?
we know better than that, right? We live here, we've learned.
There, the message board up on, that blind spot method, that coming over that hill, they talk about warning people
Yep.
about it, it's so bad.
Yep. So, okay, so, and then the last project that we had, we didn't get a full estimate on this, is that coastal evacuation ITS project. We scoped it as a study, just to kind of get an understanding of what's needed out there, and it's got a $200,000 base cost on that. When you inflate it out to 2035, it goes up to 340,000. I think that seems reasonable to me, as an approach. So what we need to do today is make some recommendations to prioritize a list of projects that will go to DOT for their scope and cost review. And as I said before, we're supposed to constrain it to that just over $8 million plus 2 projects. So I've just kind of summarized everything here in terms of the costs, our base estimate, the estimate plus the indirects, and then the estimated inflated out to 2035. These numbers will change a little bit when they actually get programmed in the tip, because like I said, we inflated everything out to 2035, but what really happens is DOT will inflate, when DOT programs it, they'll program the engineering a few years ahead of the construction, right away ahead of construction. So there'll be slightly less inflation there. On the flip side of that, they may program some of these projects for 2036, which would be increasing inflation. So, but for where we're at in the process, 2035 inflation is perfectly fine. But I would expect our final numbers for these are going to be tweaked up or down a little bit, depending on how things shake out in the end. And as part of their review, DOT tells us they'll program PE in 2030 and right away in 2031 and construction in 2035 or 2036. That's the kind of information they'll give us with that. So, and then we make our decisions based on those final numbers next winter and spring. So I've mentioned some of this already before, but I've got a couple of notes here. That Stratum Portsmouth Avenue sidewalks project, that is one that was reviewed by DOT 2 years ago. So that's already gone through this process once, and our current estimate, at least theoretically takes into those notes that DOT gave us on the project. It takes that into account, and our cost on this has gone up by about 40 to 50% compared to what we submitted 2 years ago. So I think I'm hopeful that we've accounted for those things. That being said, we may not want to submit it again as priority. That's the starting point is the discussion here at the TAC. The Winnicott Bayside Route 33 intersection, there is a study that is is supposed to start in next year on that project location. And it's the study is focused mostly around the bridge, but I am assuming that traffic operations will also be incorporated into that. So, whether we want to push forward with this, with this as a priority or not is, that's something we have to take into consideration. The 125 South Road Brentwood intersection, that the short and midterm improvements at that location have been implemented. I thought they were still ongoing, but they've definitely been implemented. The roundabout is needed there, but it's also a good candidate for some additional grant funding that we might be able to get faster than the 10-year plan process. So it may be an opportunity cost.
Consider on that is that, the speed limit there is still 55.
Right.
And it's gonna drop because about 200 yards south of there is a traffic light going in for the 800,000 square foot warehouse that's going in just south of the courthouse.
Is that happening now? Okay.
Well, yeah,
That's been talked about for a very long time.
Yeah.
This intersection's been a danger to travel for a very long time.
exactly. But what I'm saying is that the whole hold up on that one is the re-engineering of 125 south of this intersection, very closely south of this intersection.
Yeah.
And the new turn lanes and the traffic light that's going there, and another traffic light down at 108 and 125.
107.
107,
Yep.
sorry, Marshall Road, yeah. So some of this may get changed quite a bit,
Okay.
from the current reconfiguration.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and
I would hesitate to push that, the current plans we have here, and the theory that
okay,
everything could change.
Yeah.
One thing, the speed's gonna drop down.
right. And
Considerably.
when you build a roundabout, I mean, your ideal speed through your roundabout is 15 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour. I mean, it's very slow. So speeds are gonna drop for the roundabout anyhow, and that's part of the reason why they work so well.
Yeah.
Is they reduce the amount of conflict points compared to an intersection, and they force people to go slow.
Yeah, no, I agree that the roundabout's needed, but it probably should be integrated.
I would disagree. I would have to say that this road is still gonna be a crossroad to 125. You're still gonna have the volume of traffic that is there.
You can have more.
Something needs to be done there. Yeah, whether it be a light, a recommended track, a roundabout, but any other changes that happen around it aren't gonna affect the fact that it is a crossroad across 125. And that needs to be addressed.
Am I on the wrong intersection? Isn't there already a light there?
There is
No light.
There's no light?
No, I grew up on the Fremont side of North Road.
Yep.
I had to look at my parents' face when I was a 16-year-old driver, having to go out and face that intersection at 125 every day. That was the first light we put in.
So from the Fremont side of
South.
Road, if you go across 125, then you continue on past the county building, right?
No,
That's
North
That's North Road.
Yeah.
That was the very first light we put in.
Yeah.
The second light was 111A. This is the last crossroad that crosses over 125 in Brentwood. But you can configure, and 125, all that you want, you can put anything where you want on, down the street where the building is supposed to go, which we've been heard about for years and nothing's been done.
Yeah.
But you're gonna still have to cross 125 with no light, just a stop sign.
Yeah.
And that's just a dangerous situation.
Okay. Brad?
What happens if, we get that in the 10-year plan and then we get SS4A money?
It would come out of it would probably come out of the 10-year plan or, you know, it would be funded differently, basically, is the.
Right, but what would happen to the $4.2 million we programmed? Does that still stay within the?
No.
No, not necessarily. Yeah, so there's, potentially there's an opportunity cost there of selecting that. So the last note I have in here, we talked about this, 101.95, part of that is turnpike owned and operated and theoretically could use turnpike funds, which are not included in this, part of the 10-year plan, so I have some questions about that. That's sort of something that I'm hoping DOT might address if we put this one forward as one of the projects for review. They might address the turnpike funding versus the non-turnpike funding there, so. So basically where we're at is kind of making a decision about what we want to move forward with. And I'm actually gonna exit out of this so that I can edit this as we go, and if anybody online has comments, we can see them. So we basically need to come up with a constrained set of recommendations, right? 8 million roughly, give or take a little bit, plus 2 projects. And there's a couple ways we could do that. But given that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 9 are range from slightly over 8 million to way over 8 million. We are a little bit constrained in what we want to include. That being said, and I'm just gonna throw this out as a starting point for discussion, because just to kind of get things rolling, and it's not something I don't think we need to necessarily commit to. But if we selected, say, Plastow Main Street, and I'm gonna use the Brentwood project because it's, those two together just a little bit over our little bit over our share, and I think we could get away with submitting those two that way. And then we could pick from there, we could pick a couple of other ones for that next, the two additional projects. And for me, the kind of most intriguing project is the 1A traffic calming one. And then, I-95, 101, which, there's quite a bit of money tied up there, but that kind of meets the spirit of DOT's rule without actually meeting the law.
Priorities, just pick the two, pick the two for review, but I would use an R on those projects that are.
Yeah, and we have to, yes, we have to submit a prioritized list to DOT.
Okay.
So. But
I would
since,
like to consider the New Hampshire 33 bridge on that list, and my reasons are that I'm entirely dissatisfied with the response we got from Hoyle Tanner. He said, this is a proposal that was sent in. If any of you want to read it, I will send it to you. Give me your email address. This response from Hoyle Tanner leaves out major portions of it. I can list, there's at least a dozen, maybe 2 dozen things that are missing. And I'm entirely dissatisfied with this. If you look at the assumption page, there's only 4 trivial assumptions in there. They clearly did not put in enough thought or effort into this assessment. And I think we should send it back to them and tell them to do it over.
So that would mean the project.
It would be one of the 2 extras. It would have to be.
Right, but the project cost would go up, you're saying.
yeah,
More than likely.
Yeah, well, they left some things out.
Yeah.
Also, there's funding opportunities in there that they did not address.
yeah, we didn't ask them to address any of the funding opportunities. This was just to get an idea of the cost based on a rough scope.
The safety issues that they didn't address. There's no walkways across that bridge. And it is the only passageway from east side of town to west side of town. The bridge report that they do, I don't know how often they do it, but the bridge report reflects that there's 3 inches of room for walking. I don't fit in that 3 inches, neither does a bicycle. People walk across that bridge every day. Students walk across that bridge every day, and there's no lighting on the bridge when they walk across at night, you can't see them.
Yeah.
And these safety issues could be reflected in highway safety improvement plans.
So yeah, I mean, we didn't dig into the details of things like lighting, and that kind of thing, but it's pretty standard now to put, reasonable shoulders and sidewalks on bridges. So that's sort of incorporated into the cost itself. But they didn't call that out. But yeah, something like lighting and that sort of thing, that's included in there. You notice in each of these estimates, there's a contingency and there's all these sort of fudge factors in there to sort of basically try to ensure that we aren't underestimating how much the project costs. And we still may be, I think we find that, we can't really predict what things are going to look like 10 years from now in terms of costs. But that being said, I mean, we can ask Hoyle Tanner to take another look at it to see if there's some, looking in more detail at the proposal that you put in might, tweak the numbers a bit. If there's
The list of assumptions is entirely.
yeah, it was a very short list of assumptions that they put in
Every other
there.
project
And I think they based their work on the VAI study and the design that they had put together and the cost estimate that they had put in there. So they probably didn't go much beyond that, but we can have them take a second look at it. So.
Good shot.
Yeah, there was one in chat about that.
Let's see. Danya. I'll send me the email.
I will send that to you, Daniel.
Okay, so, yeah. We'll get that proposal out to you down here.
Does Hoyle Tanner use DOT weighted averages from his unit cost?
They use the most recent information that DOT has available.
Right.
On the unit costs, yeah. Last round, that didn't really help us all that much. We were still off by DOT did their review a couple months after Hoyle Tanner put it together, and it was, most of our projects saw like 30 to 40% recommended 30-40% increase. So I feel like
It's a guide.
it's going to happen again, probably, but
You
DOT.
really don't know where these numbers are to, compared to what they're coming up with and what you get at bid time, obviously, but.
Exactly, and there's so much variability there. DOT tends to, when they do the review, they look at comparable projects that have been recently completed and the costs for those. And I think, depending on the timing, in 2022, we were seeing material shortages due to the pandemic, and things got inflated very quickly. So that may be why we were seeing such big increases on our estimates at that point. But maybe that's less pressure now on that, and we might see something that's more comparable. So, but
one thing that I would say in favor of keeping that Route 33, that bridge in there, is that it affects a much higher percentage of population than, for example, the Epping Five Corners project.
Yeah.
And so it has a much bigger, obviously big cost, but that's the bridge, not
right.
But I think everybody that drives up then between Portsmouth and Exeter or whatever is affected by that, and there's a large chunk of very large, dense portion of the population that's affected by that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think comparatively, yes, the impact of the Route 33 project versus the Epic Five Corners, that's definitely more impactful on traffic and on the region, and is probably a obviously greater need, I would say, between the two, right?
And that's the other reason I would think that, we need to keep at least study of the Portsmouth traffic circle thing hanging in there, is because we don't want to tell them to drop that from our. Because there's no need for it.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, isn't that the Portsmouth traffic circle? Isn't that part of?
It's already in the 10-year plan. It is part of the turnpike. It's in the 10-year plan as a study. Yeah, I wasn't aware that they had actually brought the circle and the northern part of the bypass, and I believe the Sarah Bridge in to the turnpike system at some point. Yeah. So that was that was a bit of surprise to me a couple years ago. So it's.
Wondered if the funds can get.
Yeah, well, that Portsmouth Circle, we've got it in as a study, but that is also a really good candidate for the SS4A program, because it's a site where there's been numerous fatalities. There are just loads of crashes that occur there all the time. It is a huge, operationally, it's horrible. And so, there's an opportunity there, but that is a much larger project than, say, the Brentwood intersection at 125 at South Road in terms of for SS4A. So, maybe there's some opportunities that DOT could, to get something funded that way. All right. Danya.
Yes, hi. I have a quick question. Would it be worthwhile to consider, going back to David's comments, that we have only so much available plus 2 projects, in allocating towards that amount that we have? I guess it's 10 million thereabouts. Is worth 8. Oh, I was adding the 2, sorry. Thought that would pass. Oh, okay. So the 8 million, would it be worthwhile to just pick as many projects that would take up the 8 million? Because then we're thinking, okay, DOT sees that we are compliant with what their expectations of us are, and we then can argue that we didn't go beyond what was expected of us. Is that something that is considerable?
Yeah, the sort of the projects that I put the X by in just in this exercise, that's basically, the max I think we're gonna be able to do is 4 projects.
Yeah.
Right, because there's a few, we could do 2 projects basically that fit within that 8 million. In this case, we've got 2 projects that fit just slightly over the 8 million.
Yeah.
And then we have two additional projects. And, you know, maybe it makes sense to keep the two smaller projects in there as our 8 million. And then, you know, maybe rather than doing the 101, do the Greenland Route 33 project as an option, or, you know, swapping out one of the two extra projects.
That's what I think we should do.
You know, I'm flexible to what the TAC wants here. I mean, you know.
With the turnpike funding, I think it makes sense.
We might even get the 8.9 million, how much of that is turnpikes, so it could possibly go another way.
Yeah.
Funding wise, right?
Yeah, I mean, if turnpikes could fund a portion of that would bring that under.
Yeah.
You know, we have this sort of give and take a bit here between what might be best for the region versus what might be the best for a community. And we're trying to balance those things. And, you know, we have projects that are, you know, most everything that we're looking at here is on the regional network. It's an impacting a regional project, you know, a state highway in the region that's kind of important to travel. Some of them less so than others, the Epping Five Corners, it's on a state highway, but it's not super heavily traveled. It's not super heavy in terms of crashes and that kind of thing. The Stratum bike pedestrian, while it's important, it's not really impacting regional travel at all in the work that's done there. So it's making those bike pedestrian connections easier, which is of course important. But it's less of an impact on regional stuff there, and it's more focused on the community impacts. So, we just kind of try to give and take a little bit on that and look at what our options are. My vote is almost always to max out our opportunities to have DOT take a look at these, and that gives us the benefit of when they come back to us with their comments. In a few months, we have, potentially 4 projects to choose from instead of maybe 2 or 1 that they've reviewed. And if that one is really still expensive, we still can't afford it if it's more than $8 million. So, if we said, for instance, and I'm gonna pick the Route 33 project, we said that was our top priority and we put that forward and then added 2 others, we would get 3 projects to maybe choose from. There's no way that Route 33 project is going to come in at under $8 million. And so our option then is to kind of put it partially in the plan, say, well, we can fund one section of it, or we
Which we did last year with the traffic.
Which we did last year with the circle. Or we can, try to get one of the other 2 projects funded. So I think, it's trying to basically maximize our options here is what I like to try to do at this stage.
I like what we threw up for discussion purposes, Dave, because we've got to start somewhere, right?
Right.
I tend to lean more towards the Route 33 project than Seabrook traffic.
Okay.
I just see it as a bigger impact to the region.
Right. Okay.
The traffic calming project, is that a year-round issue, or is that more of a seasonal issue?
Well, I mean, in terms of the volume, you definitely have much higher summer volumes, right, than you do off season. But that whole section in Seabrook, that is all houses all through there, and that provides a major, there's a major opportunity there to increase the amount of bike pedestrian traffic that's moving back and forth. That being said, it also, connects down to Route 286, which then connects over to the rail trail, along 286. So you're sort of helping to, complete a loop there potentially as part of it. And that's why I see a good benefit for that as well. So that being said, portions of that project would be eligible for the TAP program, Transportation Alternatives, or the CMAQ program as well, especially if it's broken up into smaller pieces. So, there's options there. Danya, you had another comment?
Yes, I wanted just to, if I could share my vote, if there was a vote to be taken right now. One comment is that I totally agree, David, with your assessment of how you would approach this. That was what I was trying to get at in my commentary earlier. I also like the idea that we try to incorporate projects that are more more appealing to the communities, because I think we have the opportunity to give the community something sooner rather than later. If we can pick the projects that are within, of course, the 8 million. So that's just my personal views and how I would vote if you were asking for a vote.
Okay, all right, thank you. We, not to put pressure on things, but we do need to wrap this up. We have a couple more items on the agenda. One of which we definitely need to get to, the Title VI plan, so we definitely need to have some discussion around that. Basically, what I've heard from folks generally in the room would be, one option would be to substitute, in terms of what I've put an X next to, substituting the Route 33 project for one of the two sort of additional projects, either the Seabrook one or the 101 I-95 project as options. That's whatever. Did anybody have different ideas on that, or different ideas than
the last out or the front?
So I guess, my initial thoughts would be to leave those two as sort of 1 and 2.
Right, yeah.
In whichever order. I tend to put the safety projects first.
Yeah, I was
And even though 125 and South Road could be an SS4A project, at this point, it's not.
Yeah.
And so there's a benefit for us to have that as a high priority, even if that helps DOT advance it in the HSIP program and fully fund it, and we can have those discussions too with DOT as we move forward. And then, so that those 1 and 2 gets us to what, 8.3 million, which is a little bit over our share, but I also think that's close enough that we should be okay.
Yeah.
And since there's nobody on the call here from DOT today, we can run with that, since they weren't here to say no.
Especially since inflation costs,
And
they've revised them downward.
they might revise it down
So,
slightly.
it may not be.
Yeah,
realistic.
and realistically, we may not be able to do both of them anyhow,
Right.
in the end.
But I certainly would concur that moving that, I want to see what's the natural way in traffic coming. That because that's a wide road as it is, that moving that X up to the 33, because we talked about that as being impacting a large number of
Okay.
people. I understand it doesn't help biking unless they make the bridge wide enough. But I think it's a problem that's drawn a lot of attention.
Yep, okay.
That
All right, so you're suggesting we take the Seabrook project out and put in
and the one above,
the Greenland one.
and put in the 33 like that, bayside.
Plus, there's still options down the road that Seabrook project could get funding from something else, right?
Yep, I mean, that is a possibility.
And this happens every year, we have some really big, important projects, right? That we can never fund because they're 3 times the maximum amount we're allowed. And the theory is that until something major occurs and it stays forced to do something, we can never get them into line.
Right, and that's, I've had discussions with DOT about that as recently as the day before yesterday, so,
Yeah,
you
you
know,
remember
and-
last time this happened, that we
Yeah.
were expected to get funding for something from DOT and they backed out at the last
Right,
minute.
yeah, so it's a problem. I mean, given how many of these important projects are well over that $8 million, it really limits us in what we can call priorities.
Yeah.
Or we have to segment stuff out and do partially funding, and, we didn't last round, we didn't want to fund Portsmouth Circle over 2 cycles. And we had asked DOT to pick up the slack on it, and they were not interested at that point.
Yeah.
So it's in as a study only, and we picked other projects. We may have other opportunity or other instances where we're going to have to choose like that. Yeah. So, and in this case, it may be this year even. So, apologize but we do need to kind of wrap this up. So if, we could get some, motion on this or another proposal, we'd like to get that moving forward.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and move it, to reflect what's on your chart right now, the Pottstown Main Street, traffic counting program and the, 125 South Road Brentwood, roundabout as being the priority projects. Probably in reverse order, and then as the reserve, or what's the?
I don't know what they call the two extra projects.
Yeah, the extra projects, being the New Hampshire 33 project and where was it? At the bottom. The bottom, yeah, that's 101, New Hampshire 101-95.
Okay. Yeah, and I would probably put the two smaller projects as 1 and 2, and then the two bigger projects as 3 and 4.
Okay.
Is how I would do it, and I tend to put like safety is the higher priority, so I would say safety, 125 South Road over Pottstown Main Street.
Yeah, that's what the.
And then the other two, I think, are kind of interchangeable, honestly, in terms of priority. Okay, so we have a motion.
I
to
would
put
second
forward-
that, David.
All right, so we have a motion from Peter and a second from Danya. Any further discussion on those?
I just didn't endorse that because I think this focuses on the major arterials that take the most traffic in the region, 33, 101, 195, and so.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yep, all right, thanks, Chris. All right, so any other comments on the proposal that's ahead of us? Otherwise, I'll take a vote. So all in favor of this, say aye.
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 Any opposed? No, any abstaining? All right, awesome, thanks so much.
I'm sorry.
So we've got, Scott is going to talk to us about the. Yeah, so it's, Scott's gonna talk to us about the draft Title VI plan that he's put together.
Yeah, there's a slide set.
Okay. One more time into the chair. Background.
And that's my roommate's cat, Tig, he just passed away last week. We agree.
Title VI.
So we're gonna share the screen one more time. Right.
All right. So this document went out with the memo in the packet. We did not print copies of the full document for everybody to have here. I think we had 5 copies there. Folks hadn't printed their own or didn't have it on a laptop with them. But so this is our Title VI Civil Rights Program and MPO non-discrimination policies. This is a requirement for the MPO under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, 1964, the Civil Rights Restoration Act in 1987, and various DOT regulations, or recent executive order related to environmental justice. So. Okay, so essentially, this is our analysis and policies and approach to ensuring that nobody is discriminated against by the Planning Commission and the MPO on the basis of race, color, or national origin. Those are the protected classes under Title VI. And then we broadened that to include sex, age, religion, and disability, which are covered under other regulations such as the ADA and our MPO policy. So in terms of the requirements of the plan, we need to ensure that we're considering the effects of transportation project programming decisions and operational decisions on disadvantaged communities, that we're providing opportunities for public involvement to hear from folks who are members of these communities to understand their needs and concerns, that we're gathering demographic information and analyzing that so that we understand where there are concentrations of folks in disadvantaged populations, and then ensuring that we're on the basis of that analysis, minimizing, mitigating any adverse impact. So the deliverables, all of the elements of this between the document itself and the appendices include federal certifications and assurances that go along with every federal grant we sign. Our Title VI non-discrimination policy, a notice to the public of our policy, complaint procedures and documentation if we receive complaints, and then a demographic analysis that looks at minority population, population in poverty, and population with limited English proficiency. And then that we document our outreach efforts. So just kind of thumbnail of what's new in this document since the last version, which covered fiscal years 22, 23, 24. We've updated the demographic analysis. We've updated our language access plan that relates to limited English proficiency. We've included a couple of key MPO documents, which we had translated into Spanish last year. And then based on recommendations from Federal Highways at our last MPO review, we've revised the complaint forms. We previously had a single consolidated complaint form that addressed complaints under Title VI, environmental justice regulations, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. There was a recommendation that we split those out. So in terms of the demographic analysis, here you see, well, it's covered up by our box in the upper right there, but this is mapping of the minority population in the region, using data from the actually that mislabeled, should be 2018 through 2022 5-year American Community Survey estimates. So the picture here is generally consistent with what we had seen in the last update, which was based on the 2014 to 2018 American Community Survey data. We see pretty much the same hotspots with non-white and Hispanic populations, particularly in Salem and the south end of Salem. There's been a growing Hispanic population for 15, 20 years now, and that has continued to grow. And then in Portsmouth, those two dark blue areas in Portsmouth, I think correspond. The one furthest north, I think, is driven by the Gosling Meadows public housing development, and then down along Route 1, you have a number of apartment complexes that have immigrant and refugee populations. So overall, in the 2014 to 2018 data, the minority population for the region was 7.6%. We're now up to 10%. Statewide, it was just under 10, and we're now to 13. And so this is a continuation of growth that we've seen over the last several updates here. And again, that growth is particularly concentrated in Salem and Portsmouth, although there have been incremental growth in other communities as well. So this next one is population in poverty. So this is percent of population that's below the federal poverty line. In terms of comparing to the last update, we're slightly higher in the MPO region, slightly lower statewide. Generally speaking, similar patterns to prior years. Again, in Portsmouth and that northern census tract. So this is based on census tract, not town boundaries. You see the impact of the Gosling Meadows housing complex. Interesting here how Danville and Sandown light up. That was not the case in the last update. It's possible for there to be sampling issues with the American Community Survey because it's just a much smaller sample size than in the old census long form. And so sometimes we see odd artifacts that may be due to that, or it may not. But I mean, there's some potential COVID impact here as well. So looking at languages spoken at home. So the other element that we need to look at is limited English proficiency, and there's a question in the American Community Survey as what's your language spoken at home? And then do you speak English very well, less than well? Actually, now it's just very well or less than very well. And for population that says on the American Community Survey that they speak English less than very well, we need to look at that. And if the population that has limited English proficiency in a given language group surpasses a particular threshold, we need to be translating MPO documents. And in general, we need to be prepared to handle translation for folks that come to meetings or call the office or what have you.
So the difference between the 4140 and the 1054 that you cited for the Spanish speaking population is that 1054 is the number that are limited to English proficiency. Right now, that was being over 1,000, it caused the requirement for the translation.
So we haven't yet seen the limited English proficiency number for Spanish, but yes, so these are folks who speak Spanish at home. And the majority of those are proficient in English, they just happen to speak Spanish at home. You particularly see that with French Haitian Creole. You have fairly large numbers of people that speak French at home, but the limited English proficiency numbers there are quite a bit lower than for Spanish. So so you see these just for language spoken at home. Now we look at, oops. There we go. So limited English proficiency in terms of folks that speak English, speak only English, just shy of 94% speak English only. That's down a few tenths from the last update here. The number of Spanish LEP speakers has, the last time it was just under 1,000, it was 968, and we're now over 1,000. 1,000 is a specific threshold as far as Title VI is concerned. And once you're over 1,000 speakers of a particular language who have limited English proficiency, that triggers requirements for translation of certain MPO documents. We have seen this coming over the last several cycles, and so we've been doing this already for a while. The numbers for Chinese speakers are pretty consistent. Slight increase in Korean, slight decrease in LEP for French and French Creole, pretty stable in terms of Arabic. And the numbers, the 1.4% LEP for the region as a whole is consistent with the last update. For the state, I think we're up maybe a 10th, but fairly stable. And then you see here's mapping at the town level. We don't have census tract data that's reliable for LEP, but again, you see concentration down in Salem related to the Hispanic population there that has been growing for many years. And then in Portsmouth, the Kensington lighting up the way it does, that is something that I suspect is a sampling anomaly. We did see significant growth. This is going back to minority population. There was a significant growth in Korean population in Exeter. Significant growth in Chinese population showed up in Northampton. But again, those numbers for the MPO region in terms of overall percentage of folks who have limited English proficiency are pretty stable from last cycle. And then this, just all of these maps have had the distribution of projects from the TIP, from the 10-year plan, from the long-range plan. Just to look at whether there's any sort of inequitable distribution of projects, either in terms of benefits or burdens. And you tend to see projects concentrated in the more urbanized areas. the base map here is the minority population. And then you tend to see fewer projects in the more rural communities. And I think that tends to follow available staff to put projects forward as much as anything. It's what we've observed over time. So in terms of findings from the demographic analysis, as I've referenced, continued slow growth in the Hispanic population, particularly Hispanic and non-white population since 2020. Slight increase in low-income population since 2020. We don't see evidence of discrimination in project programming in terms of distribution of projects by demographics of communities. And then continued growth in the limited English proficiency population for folks who speak Spanish, and that we have been taking steps to address that. We talk in the document about what sorts of outreach efforts we're doing to ensure that we're learning about the needs and concerns of vulnerable populations. Traditionally, a lot of that has been through our work with the regional coordinating councils for community transportation. We're involved with two of those, one that covers Stratford and Eastern Rockingham County, one that covers Western Rockingham County and the greater Manchester area. But those organizations bring together human service agencies that provide transportation, typically for older adults and folks with disabilities. And so those agencies tend to be familiar with the needs of low-income populations in particular that they serve. There are transit coordination plans that we need to update every few years that go by those RCC boundaries. When we update those, we do surveys of local welfare officers, of human service agencies. More recently, there's been outreach specifically to try to understand needs of vulnerable populations for the Safe Streets and Roads for All project. And we just put together a contact list for CAW that they are doing outreach to vulnerable populations in the context of climate change and resiliency. Some DEI training available through the Alliance for Healthy Aging and the Endowment for Health. We've done some focus groups and survey for the long range plan update. A couple of years ago for the Age-Friendly Community Project, we did do outreach to the memberships of Seacoast NAACP and then the Racial Unity Team in Exeter. We actually have not gone out and met with them in the last couple of years, but would like to continue to cultivate those relationships. In terms of language access, something that has happened in the last year is we contracted with a Central Language Bank to translate a couple of our MPO documents, our MPO and Regional Planning Commission overview brochure and the project prioritization process brochure that they've put together. We now have had those professionally translated, and those are downloadable on the website. Other elements to the language access plan, I mentioned the outreach documents. All of our civil rights documents in terms of our non-discrimination policy, our complaint forms, our complaint documentation and procedures are all translated into Spanish and are on the website. We have the Google Translate function for the website, recognizing that that's not perfect, but in terms of maintaining elements of the website, it's the best approach there. We, as I said, have worked with a professional translator to do the documents themselves. And then we have an arrangement with the Central Language Bank for on-call interpretation if that were to come up in terms of a meeting or somebody here calling the office. Something we do need to do under federal regs is develop a training for MPO staff in terms of if we do receive a call from somebody who has limited English proficiency, just how to work with them or how to work with folks who might come to a public meeting. So certainly happy to take any questions on the document. The recommended action essentially is that we're looking for a recommendation to the MPO Policy Committee that they adopted at their December meeting This document requires a 45-day public comment, and so in order to be done in time for the December meeting, start that comment process tomorrow.
I'll second that. Red.
Any questions online or questions in the room?
Yes.
About the share.
Yeah, here, let me stop the share so we can see folks. Chris.
Got the percentage, of the, either low income or the, immigrant status is based on the census. Is there any, indication of how that is impacted by people that simply come to New Hampshire to work, such as those come from center cities in Boston up here to work? That how that may,
I think that if somebody works here but does not reside here, that wouldn't show up in the census. We did used to see what you might call an anomaly, that depending on when the census forms were distributed, we used to see high low income population in Hampton Beach. So if those came out in the winter, that there was a seasonal low income population in Hampton Beach. Interestingly, that didn't show up and light up this cycle the way it used to. So I'm not yet sure just what changes, there are just changes in the housing market in Hampton Beach that folks aren't renting out rooms as much in the winter or what have you. But folks who were to live in Boston or Lawrence or something like that and work out here would be captured on the census at their homes. Is that?
yes, this essentially, someone kind of noticed a significant increase in the number of people in certain stores, and a lot of them travel up in large vans. And many of them are immigrant population, and obviously there's a saturation point on jobs available in the Boston region, but there are more plentiful low income jobs up in this area that they immediately go for.
Yeah, I know like Highliner Foods in Portsmouth, for example, has had buses of immigrant workers that come up from cities in Massachusetts. I think a lot of the hotels actually aren't necessarily working with immigrants, but like J1 visa students that come over seasonally. I'd be interested to know other stores if you were observing that, because that would be useful for the TMA in terms of outreach and. Okay. Great. Any other questions? Okay, did you have a question, Donnie?
Yes, well, it was more of a comment. Thank you. This is really interesting, the demographics aspect of it are of a particular interest to me. But you mentioned that there may be a time when you have either a participant or you get a phone call and you don't have anyone at your reach to do the translation. I speak Spanish and French fluently, so if I were to continue to be on the TAC, you can use me as a person you can reach out to for either of those languages. I speak German as well, but the Germans normally speak better English than I do. No, but on a serious note, maybe just a profile of everyone who is on the TAC who have language capabilities. You could set up a database with that information should you require as things move forward.
That's a great idea. Thank you. I don't think we have anybody currently who's fluent in Spanish. Or do you speak Spanish? Okay. Yeah, I don't think we have anybody on staff currently who's fluent in Spanish. So in that instance, we've assumed that we would need to work through essentially a language bank and get somebody on the line. But good to know that we have you as a resource and actually collecting some feedback from other TAC members could be useful.
Yeah, I think that's definitely worth exploring a bit. So, thank you.
Any other questions or observations? All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of, all in favor of endorsing this draft document and recommending to the policy committee that they adopt it in December, please raise hands, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It is 1:57. I'm gonna table the East Coast Greenway update for the next meeting.
Yeah.
And speaking of the next meeting, our next meeting is off schedule. It's, I believe, December 5th. So it's Thursday, but it's the first Thursday of the month. Be prepared for that, I guess. We'll send out information ahead of time. At this point, we are planning to have a meeting. We've got some other things that we need to start talking about beyond the 10-year plan project selection, so. But in the couple minutes we have left, are there any particular agency or community announcements that that folks need to get out? Maybe I'll start with those folks that are online. Jack, do you have anything from DES that you need to talk about?
Not at this time. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jack. Anybody else? Eric or Joe or Tanya?
No, I'm okay. Thank you. Great meeting.
All set.
All right, thanks. All right, anybody in the room? Hearing nothing, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. All right, thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate your time. And we'll see you December 5th, if not before.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, by the way, I didn't bring something that always time that, but I noticed there's a little bit of difference between the paragraph 2 and the table. I don't know if, and you've got here June 22nd, 2022. And I think we talked about it in June of this year, so I.
Yeah, you weren't editing them.
I just figured that was one of those things I thought I'd mention. I wanted to go behind. You know,
And ask the board, if anybody.
Apparently didn't bother anybody.